Hello, my friends. This is Lynda Lippin, and welcome to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Hello, everybody. It's your host, Lynda Lippin, and welcome back one more time to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Today, we have an interview, and the interview is with a fabulous attorney who deals only with people like us.
Yeah.
Yes. I've got Cory Sterling with me coming from Canada, and Cory handles legal for Pilates teachers, Pilates studios, for fitness, for massage, for, all things in the healing and body space. And we do have some, specific needs and some specific issues that we have to be solid on and know that we've addressed in a good legal fashion. Cory has his BA from McGill University, has his master's in sports management from University of San Francisco, his JD from Bond University, and passed the bar in British Columbia. Yeah. I have a doctorate in philosophy. And so a lot of, my undergrad philosophy folks also went to law school.
Yeah.
So my first year after graduate school, my roommate was actually one of my colleagues' undergrad. And I went to Temple, with an assistantship for philosophy. And he ended up getting into Penn for law. So we were like, yeah, let's just roommate together. And then when I married my husband, he helped us find a judge who had time in his schedule to do that. So it all kind of came.
Those are my favorite find a lawyer type stories. Like, and my friend's a lawyer and we got married. I'm like, awesome. Let's hope it ends that.
Exactly.
Like, that's perfect ending to working with a lawyer.
So when the judge who was going to marry us was sick and couldn't come in, I called Tim and I was like, Tim, we need a judge. And we ended up getting married in family court chambers.
Beautiful, romantic. That's someone's fantasy for sure.
Well, something, the judge and his entire staff started crying in the middle of it because all they dealt with all day, all the time was divorce and custody and all kinds of nastiness. And they were just like, we're having a wedding.
How fun.
So that was really fun. And I noticed, and something you should know about Cory, if you're kind of questioning, do I want to deal with a lawyer? Like, what is this like? Is that on his website under About Us, the title is, If It's Not Fun, Why Do It? Which I think is a very good question for everybody in life in general.
Yeah.
So welcome, Cory, to the Pilates Goddess podcast. How are you?
Thank you. That's my favorite introduction that I've ever heard. So I'm feeling really, really great about this. And I have to say, I was very proud when you're like, and he's a lawyer and he's like us, because I feel very much so like that. I was in Pilates class this morning. I've made a pledge for 3 months to go to class 6 times a week for a period of 3 months and just see what happens to my body by virtue of doing that. And it's so interesting. I'm in Belgium at the moment. I'm living in Antwerp, and I actually didn't need any social tools other than Pilates in order to start a life. Like, I moved here and I joined a Pilates studio called The Brick, big shout out, which is an amazing space. But I found an incredible teacher. I've made amazing friends. I'm there, I'm talking. It's so cool when as you get older in life and do new things do new things as a new version of yourself. Like, I have a self-sustaining social life based on Pilates. Like, I'm not going to the bar. I'm not going to clubs. I'm not going to parties. All of my friends that I have met through Pilates, and then I meet their friends and so on. But so I'm very honored to be part of, to be a member of the greater community. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. So basically, your business model specializes, right, in working with personal, let's say personal services providers, because, that's in a way what we're kind of lumped in.
Yeah, I think for me, I see it as health and wellness. Sometimes I have clients who will sell goods. So they'll actually sell a particular product and I'm helping them with something around that, or they deliver on, so it's not always necessarily services, but 90% of my clients are Pilates or yoga or group fitness or coaches of some form. Like that's who I work with. That's who I really get along well with. That's who I resonate. And I decided, you sort of just gave it to me by sharing, if it's not fun, why do it? But I started as a corporate lawyer in a big law firm and I hated it. And I was about to quit law. And then I had this idea, like, why don't I just work with people who would be my friends and find a way to make the process of law fun for them, understanding that they don't really know anything about law, that they're a heart-leading health and wellness professional in the sense that they want to make a difference. They want to make the world a happier place. They want to make their community stronger, happier, fitter, all of those things. And so if I can play some small piece of that by helping them protect and grow their businesses through proper legal means, that's like, one of the small stars in the constellation of my life.
That's great. Because I know just from friends and clients who are, partners in major global law firms, that it's a little bit soul sucking. It is. And to be able to sort of hone down your business, which I think is a lesson for Pilates teachers, frankly, and for all of us in the wellness space, that we don't have to appeal to everybody. And that working corporate is not necessarily the best and greatest thing. And it can be for some people. Some folks want that. They want that life. They want that recognition. They want to be sent around. They want to become partner. They want to do that whole situation. And other folks want to make a living, help people, and be happy.
From everything you've shared, be happy are the two most important words from all of that for me.
Yes. So let's kind of start out with some of the legal questions that I've really been seeing online that kind of concern me, right? One of which is people opening home Pilates studios and not being sure what kind of legal protection they need. So say, I get done with my teacher training. Maybe I have a non-compete, although, in the US is looking at non-competes right now, and that they're not going to be a thing anymore. And really, they're hard to defend in court, especially in something like Pilates anyway. But say, you got space, you want to open a home studio, you get the equipment, you're ready to roll. What do you need?
Wow. Well, the first thing that what you need is the most amount of legal protection possible with the least amount of effort or thought about it. Because one thing I've learned about working with Pilates professionals is, I've worked with over 1,000 clients since I started my business. And what I've learned is that there's a very small percentage of those who think that it's their job to learn everything about the law. Mm-hmm. But in the same way, a student's going to a Pilates class, their goal isn't to learn everything about Pilates and the body and the powerhouse and how everything operates. Their job is to do the exercise properly to get the benefits from it. And it's the same for me. If the question is, what do I need to do? What you need to do is follow the exercise properly by a teacher who understands what is required. Because let's face it, unless you have some invigorated, brand new passion for law and studying and learning about all of these things, this is not how you want to spend your time. You want to spend your time finding someone who knows what you need and who is able to give it to you in an easy, fun, relaxed, productive, informative way. So that's like the pretext or the preamble, just to say that what do I need? What you need is to be protected without, focusing too much of your energy on there. And like, I think it's always that fine line of like, what is the least, I would want my clients to put in the least amount of effort and time required to get the best results possible. That's efficiency. Right. So, in a practical sense, if let's say there's someone who's listening, they're like, I really do want to know what everything that I need to have and what should be there. The first starting point of how you have to think about the law through a different lens, and I'm going to try to give you some perspective on how you might be able to do that. But the first thing you want to think about the law is a series of relationships. So all that it really is at law is you have a series of relationships with different people in your business. And what are those different relationships that you have? And within those relationships, you have one goal, which is to communicate expectations openly and honestly. Because we could talk about statutes, we could talk about amendments, we could talk about judgments, we could talk about all the legally stuff. Practically speaking, on a day-to-day basis, what I see lawyering is communicating expectations openly and honestly, and having that captured in some form, which is usually the form of an agreement or a contract. Because if you're able to say to someone, before we started working together, I told you exactly what to expect. I told you how this was going to go. I gave you a roadmap for our relationship. You signed it. You agreed to do certain things in this particular relationship. And now you're trying to change that. So let's have a look at why you're trying to do that and what that could mean and what the implications are. So the first thing is, what do I need to know? You need to know that at law, you have a relationship with other people in your business. And the goal for that relationship should be to communicate expectations openly and honestly. The second thing that you want to consider, or that you have to appreciate, is that there are invisible rules that automatically apply to these relationships, even if you don't know about them. Right. And so the biggest one for a Pilates professional would be something like liability. And if I am facilitating an activity for someone else and I'm holding myself out as a teacher and they are the student, and if they get injured while they are performing the activities that I'm teaching to them, at law, I will be legally responsible to make them whole again as if the injury or damages never took place. Right. And it's invisible. So conceptually, you don't get it because people are like, oh, like what? The classic thing I'll always hear is like, oh, but it's my friends and family. I'm starting with my friends and family. And so I've seen situations where something like, okay, friends and family, my friend's husband is coming by for a session. He's the breadwinner for the family. He works in programming and software. Something malfunctions with the equipment. He hits his head. He's not able to look at a screen. Suddenly, he's not able to support for his family and bring in money. So they don't have money. And at that point, it doesn't matter how good of friends we are because there's a baseline of everyone needing to look out for themselves. The question isn't morally if that's right or wrong, but that's a reality of something that I see as a lawyer. So liability is one of those invisible relationships that exists. And in part of listening to this conversation or working with a lawyer who understands, the specifics of the industry, you have to appreciate that. And two other small examples of these invisible relationships is one is anytime you collect personal information and privacy laws, like intuitively, you're not like, oh, I've just sent you over to a third-party processing credit card company. Now I have some legal involvement in this relationship because I'm facilitating the sharing of your information. Whereas at law, government said, okay, if anyone's sharing any personal information, which is A, B, C, D, they legally have to have a document which says F, G, H, I. I'm actually impressed that I know the letters of the alphabet. As I was doing that, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to screw this up. I know I'm. And then lastly, like with the relationship with your clients, there's a lot of consumer protection laws that apply that are constantly updated consumer protection laws because the way business functions and the way that we operate is different. So you think you could be signing someone to an annual membership and you can put in no refunds, but 4 days later, if they want a refund for that, legally, they are able to receive the money back. And that's something that people just don't think about because no one spends their time, unless you're me or no one spends their time studying consumer protection laws or understanding all that sort of stuff. So I hope this is like a good elementary introduction of what are the things that I need to think about. You need to think about the relationships you have, and you need to be protected in those relationships with signed agreements that communicate expectations openly and honestly. And you need to appreciate and work with someone who can see the invisible rules and obligations you have for each of those relationships.
Right. Because otherwise you end up unprotected, or, at best you might end up just pissing somebody off. Like we talked about, say, opening a home studio, and suddenly you've got clients coming in and out of your apartment building or your driveway, and your neighbors are like, what the hell's going on? And why are there all these strangers in the neighborhood?
Yeah.
Are you allowed to do this? Is this cool? Or, what's happening here? Or worse, you end up harming somebody through, and for new teachers, especially, who are the ones who are like, oh, I'm done with my training, I'm just going to open up my home studio. I always say to new teachers, like, you want to spend as much time as you can around experienced teachers.
Yeah.
Like, being brand new is not the time to open up your home studio. Being brand new is the time to be, still feel like you're being a little bit mentored, and you can ask questions and see what other folks are doing. But there's so many, a lot of times, especially nowadays, apprentices and trainees are being handed clients who are in acute pain or in chronic pain, because studios are needing teachers, basically.
Yeah.
So they're running people through trainings and then handing them clients. Again, a lot of times also their friends and family, but they come in injured. Like you said, they've got the back thing, they've got the neck thing, they sit all day, they're, coding, they're accountants, they're doing whatever, and people can get hurt.
Yeah. Look, if the best case scenario is that you're pissing off your neighbors, that's, for me,
Right.
best case scenario is everyone's happy and getting healthier and feeling better in their bodies. Yeah. In terms of a worst case scenario, look, if you are working with, if you're just starting your own studio, your house is one of your biggest assets. Worst case scenario would be something goes wrong in your house, and now that asset is becoming liable to pay a debt that you have because of what took place. Like, that's something that you don't think about that can happen, but I've seen the process of that unfold and what it can look like. It could be that you've worked really hard to earn money and you need that money to support your family, and then you have to give that money back, or someone files a complaint against you, and now you have to spend money on a lawyer to resolve the situation because it wasn't done properly at the start. So I'm not I'm not like the fear mongering type. I'm not going to tell you all the stories of the massive fails that my clients have had and any of that. But what I do want to talk about is just make sure that everyone understands what it is that they need. So if we come back to home studios, and, like, let's say I'm opening a home studio, what are the different things that I would need? Is it cool if I sort of dive into that, so that anyone who's listening is walking away with that practical advice? So you want to think about the different relationships you have. So one is you have your relationship with your home, and that is mostly about you making sure that your insurance covers you for the activities of what it is that you're doing. So insurance, it's like insurance and law are Batman and Robin together.
Yes.
You need both of them to get the thing that you want and to be safe and to be protected. You're going to need legal documents. You're going to need insurance. Now, a lot of the times I work with clients who aren't sure, like the magic words I'll hear is like, I'm not sure if my insurance covers me for ... And the way that you do this, what I always say to clients is like, you are paying some company or some person or some insurance broker money for your insurance policy. So your obligation is to call them on the phone, tell them exactly what you're doing, tell them what you intend to be doing, and make sure that you're covered, and say, if not, how much, these are the magic words, how much more do I have to contribute to my premium to ensure that I'm fully covered? And that is,
yes.
If you've taken one, I'm not an insurance guy, but that is what you have to say. You think of your lawyer as your best friend, think of your insurance broker as your best friend. These are the people who are protecting the assets you and your family have worked your whole life to create. So, or, have a coffee if you love coffee. If you love, if you love popcorn, make popcorn and get on the phone. Like, go to your happy place and call the insurance person and understand. But basically, when it comes to the home, the big thing you want to make sure is that you're legally covered in terms of insurance, so that God forbid if something happens, you have professional liability insurance operating out of your home. All of it's good, no worries. You've alluded to this a couple of times in terms of like whether or not you would actually be allowed to have a place of business out of your residence. And I think that's important too, to be honest. I've never once had a file or a client come across with that sort of issue where they're like, hey, I'm running this out of my house, but the zoning municipality of my community doesn't permit it. What do I do? How do I resolve it? Because I haven't seen it, it doesn't mean that that it doesn't exist and it's not a thing. But the general advice I would give to that is like, A, if it's really important for you, and understand what you're able to do in your space or not. And B, I would just have as good a relationship with my neighbors as possible. Because if you're friendly with your neighbors and your friends, they're not going to be reporting you to city council. You could give them small chocolates and say hi and say thank you and create some sort of personal relationship. And that's in a very strange way, Lynda, like that's what lawyering is. It's right. Like finding a way to coach people to have good relationships so that if a problem comes up, that for the most part, everything's taken care of. But when it comes to the relationship with the home, those are the two biggest things: insurance, and then looking at if there are certain rules that permit you or restrict you from certain operations, and all of that. The next big one is going to be the waiver of liability for the duty of care that you have. So you're teaching someone. It could be at the park. It could be a pre-recorded video that you post. It could be in your spare bedroom. Doesn't matter. It could be in a proper studio. Like I said before, if you're facilitating the activity, you have a responsibility to make sure they don't get injured. And so your job through the waiver of liability is to say, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. This is where we're doing it. This is the equipment that we're doing it with. These are all the things that can go wrong. If something goes wrong, this is what it's going to look like, significant change to quality of living, loss of earning capacity, all that. You put all of that sort of stuff in there. They agree to voluntarily participate. They agree that they are healthy enough to participate. And then they agree not to sue you, your family, the property, then you put the whole sort of bucket list. But that's a really, really big one. And often I'm presented with clients who will download a copy of an agreement or get it.
I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah. So it's the vantage point that I have is most of the time when I say most, I would say 95 plus, I look at the agreement and I'm like, okay, if someone got injured and signed this agreement and they sent it to me and they said, hey, Cory, do I have a case based on this? The answer is almost always yes. Because if it's not drafted by a specific industry expert or someone who really understands the ins and outs of what needs to be in that agreement, then the whole basis of the waiver is that you told me what the risks were, you told me what we were doing, you were very specific in communicating all of that. The risk that we anticipated materialized, the injury materialized. Am I allowed to hold you responsible for that? And so often when people are using it's like anything, you pay for what you get for what you pay for. I don't know. I forget which words it is first in that saying, but essentially if you're getting something for free from your cousin who has a studio, A, you have no idea where they got it. And B, you don't know what the quality of that is. And C, you're not an expert in reading legal documents. So you don't know if that can help you or not.
Right. It's interesting too, because a lot of folks don't realize, even if they're working for other people or with other people, because, in general, for most Pilates, yoga, fitness people, they're independent contractors, right? But are treated studios tread that legal line between employees and independent contractors. So suddenly you have a space that's hiring independent contractors, but they're taking, control of schedule, and they're doing, assigning shifts and doing all of those things. And the teachers aren't always clear that they still need liability insurance. Like I always say, if you're an independent contractor, you're a business.
Correct.
You are a business that's being contracted. It's just like hiring somebody to, renovate your apartment. You're hiring a contractor. They have to have specific insurances. I mean, I live in Lower Manhattan, and just to get our TV hung up on the wall involved so much insurance paperwork, and so much, we had to find specific contractors who the building accepted, who had insurance to the limits that the building wanted. It's like a whole event.
Yeah.
And a lot of Pilates teachers don't realize that if you're going out, you're going to people's houses, say you're going to different studios, you're trucking around, that you need liability insurance for that.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Full stop, you do. And it's the exact same game with the home insurance of just like calling up, if whoever it is that you're working with in whatever insurance company. And I know a couple that I refer clients to, but the big thing that you want to make sure is that your insurance covers you for all the activities that you do. If this is another pro tip that's really important, let's say you're working for a studio and they say that you are covered under their policy, get that in writing and get that in an email and get them confirming that in writing. Because before there's a problem, nothing really matters because nothing's at play because there's no problem. Once there's a problem, and I've been through this with a client before, where the issue came to whether or not the teacher, who's a contractor, was covered under the studio's policy. As a lawyer, the thing that I was dying for was one email from the teacher to the studio saying, "Hey, can you please confirm that I'm covered under your studio's studio's Pilates policy?" And just an email back which said, "Yeah, all of our teachers are covered under our insurance policy. Full stop." If I would have had that, honestly, that's where you go from something being paying $300 for a lawyer to work you through a problem to make sure that it's fine, versus something of $30,000. And it's just like, where was that? Where that's just like the one thing I needed. So this is also just a pro tip for everyone who's listening, is get as much in writing as possible. Because if I would have had that email, then we could show the studio made a misrepresentation, the teacher engaged in the relationship under the assumption that they were covered. It wouldn't absolve them 100% from responsibility, but it would take a significant percentage off of showing that the studio made a misrepresentation. And then that's leverage in negotiations. It's like there's a whole backside to law, which no one really needs to know about, because, that might tip that efficiency point, but you just want as much in writing as possible. If your studio is telling you that you're covered, make sure you get some form of confirmation about that. These are sort of the small things that really make a big difference in the long run. But first and foremost, have your legal documents and have insurance. Right.
And make sure, although I think since the COVID situation, most insurances cover online training, but I'm sure that a lot of them don't, just because they don't have to, and you can pay extra for that, or, do whatever you need with that. It's like, people go on my Acuity and they're like, your terms and conditions is really long for that checkbox. And I'm like, right, because my waiver of liability is in that terms and conditions. So when you check that you have read and accepted my terms and conditions, you've read through that waiver of liability, just like you would have if you were in my studio.
Yeah.
And I handed it to you.
That's perfect. And that's how it has to be done. And I think there's a lot of barriers that clients have sometimes about, what do I get, is it too, and at Conscious Counsel, we really mastered the art of the 3-page agreement, where any sort of relationship or anything that's happened, we can condense down to 3 pages. But but yeah, you have to have it, and you have to have people sign it. So yeah. And I just want to just wrap up quickly about this whole idea of the home studio, just so that, because if we don't get there, I would feel bad that I didn't share the major documents that are required. So there's the waiver of liability. There's a privacy policy for any personal information that you collect or transfer. So unless they're paying you in cash or they're writing a check out to you, which I don't think, I think that happens in a low percentage. If you have a mailing list, if you have a social media, any of those sorts of things, you need a privacy policy for that. And then the third agreement, which is so important, let's say I have a home studio, is a client service agreement. So this communicates the relationship that you have with your clients and any of the specifics around that, in terms of cancellations, in terms of payments, in terms of refunds, in terms of expectations, in terms of behavior. The new 2023 conversation about service agreements, which is reflective of the changes going on in society, is like the importance of putting in behavioral guidelines and expectations if you have a studio. Because now what's happening, and I've seen this with a couple of incidents I went through last year and changes of legislation, which will eventually catch up. If someone is acting inappropriately at your studio, as the studio owner, you could be deemed negligent if you did not proactively explain to people what sort of environment you have and what expectations people should have of you. So God forbid if there's an assault, and like the classic example, which probably is not relevant to this community listening to this podcast, but it's important to know that these things happen. You know, an assault either of a student or a student assaulting a teacher or whatever it is, like God forbid if something like that happens, your legal position is so different if you can demonstrate a document saying like, we do not accept harassment or, bigotry or racism or sexism or, anything of that whatsoever. If any of that behavior happens, you will be kicked out of the studio immediately without a refund, all of that sort of stuff, versus not having that in there. Because at the end of the day, in a very practical way, law is always about reasonableness. So what would like the average Pilates teacher or Pilates studio owner on the street, what would be a reasonable expectation for them to have to safely and properly protect their staff, protect their students, operate a business? So now what we're seeing with service agreements, in addition to protecting, the teacher from all the consumer protection laws as best as possible, to making sure you get paid, to making sure the expectations with your clients are set. And that really will grow your business. Like what will grow your business is communicating your expectations at the start and, holding yourself accountable to them. But now it's like laws becoming more complex and having to wear more in different hats. So in summary, just to bring that all together, and then we can talk about all the things that we're going to talk about. If you're operating out of your home, you need to make sure that you have insurance, that your home insurance covers you for professional liability and that your home insurance covers you for what you're doing. You need a waiver so that people understand the risks of the activity, what they're doing with you, where they're doing it with you. Are they walking through your house and you have a toddler who has toys hanging around, like all of that sort of stuff. The client service agreement, which is about expectations for the relationship and expectations for behavior and recourse that you have against others in the event that they break those expectations. And then operations for everything you do online in terms of privacy, collection of information, social media, teaching classes online, all that sort of stuff. So this is, we're still going to have a great conversation around it. But if the question is, I'm running a home studio, what are the things that I need? Really, those 4 agreements are going to be the core crux of what will protect you and make sure that you have everything sorted.
Now, once we get past the kind of, studio and client-centered legal stuff, there's also the issue of intellectual property. And I do notice that, in your practice, you actually have a lawyer who specializes in intellectual property. Now, we know Pilates and the system is generic, or at least in the US, right? And that was kind of, that was such an interesting case, right? Because they are loath to take away a trademark. once given. So,
Yeah.
to take that away after decades and decades of having it on the books was a big deal. But we all have our little niches within Pilates that can still be protected and that need to be protected.
Yeah.
So let's just talk for a second about trademarks, about registered trademarks. I somehow managed without a lawyer to trademark Pilates Teacher Mastermind here in the US. It ended up needing to be on the secondary register, but after a number of years on the secondary register, if no one's called it out, they'll move it up to the primary register. So I was very happy with that. But if I had to do it again, I would definitely use a lawyer and just get it done, correctly the first time. So when would a Pilates teacher need that kind of protection?
I'm going to share when a Pilates teacher would need that protection, but the joke that I wanted to make, but I didn't want to interrupt you, is that all it takes is a PhD in philosophy to be able to register a trademark on the secondary register.
Right.
That's it,
That's it, just a little.
Trademarks are a highly technical, highly confusing, highly litigious, expensive area of law. They're very, very, very important to a brand and to a business owner. So I'll share a little bit about, and I've been through, like, more so than injuries, I've been through like the whole gamut of experiences around trademarks. So I'm happy to share, but essentially the way that you want to think about it is when you've come up with either a unique logo or a unique word or series of words together that describe the goods and services that you offer, you have the possibility of registering those with the trademark office. We'll just keep this to the US Patent and Trademark Office in the States. But you can register that for exclusive use and enforceable rights by receiving a trademark around it. Now, the reason why they exist, and it's important to understand the reason, because when you understand the reason, it will make more sense of whether or not it applies to you or when it would apply to you, is that if the trademarks didn't exist, everyone could just copy each other, and then consumers would have no idea about the quality of goods that they're purchasing. So it's about, okay, I'm buying this water bottle, and I see that there's a registered trademark from this company, so I know that the quality of this water bottle is from this company, and I know exactly what I'm buying, and no one can copy it. Because otherwise, if there weren't, then two companies could have the exact same mark, could have the same word, and I wouldn't know which one I'm getting. And it's also like to reward entrepreneurs with coming up with creative ways to describe their product that the public in general knows. Now, this is the big thing to know about when to trademark. And I always run through something that I just call it sort of like the marriage or the tattoo test of when should I trademark. And that's like sort of, I'm not married, but I hope that when I get married, that I will know that that's really the right person for me, and that irregardless of where the marriage goes, that at least in that moment, I was committed to that. Like that, this is what I'm committed to. I'm going through this. I don't know how it's going to end. This may not be, the person for the rest of my life, or in trademark talk, romantic trademark talk. This may not be the brand that I build every business that I'll ever have around, but I know that it's important enough for me right now that I need to secure it, and I want to have it, and I want to make sure that I have it. Also, alternatively, it's sort of like getting a tattoo on the assumption that you put care into the tattoos that you put on your body, right? It's sort of like, okay, I'm with this for a long time, so I want to make sure that it's right. Once you have that, you have a green light from me to go for a trademark. And this is the reason why. There's no right time to get a trademark, because you don't know when someone else may trademark your particular mark.
Right.
So the big thing to know is when you register a trademark, you are the only one who's allowed to use it, and you have legal rights that you can enforce around using it. So let's say for me, I don't know if I think people are just going to hear this, but I have a water bottle with a sticker that says Vic. Okay. So let's say Vic is the name of my Pilates company. It's called Vic Pilates. Okay. And now I'm going along and I love it. And I have my online studio and I'm doing my in-home studio and all the things are happening. One day I wake up, and I've been through this with clients many times, and it is not fun. One day I wake up and I get an email from some Vic Pilates in Idaho that has an online studio and says, hey, we realize that you're using the same name as our registered trademark. You have 15 days to change your website, change your branding, change your marketing, change everything. If you do not, we will sue you. You will be responsible for covering our legal costs. It's there's unequivocal legal. Our position is perfect. You are in the wrong with what you're doing. Change everything now. And so with trademarks, there's no right answer in the sense of like, oh, it's like when you have $10,000 in the bank, that's when you should trademark. Because you could have 10,000, you could have 9,999 and someone else registers that day. Right. And now you were waiting for that. So it's the answer is to trademark when you know that you love it and you're going to need it. And a trademark is one of the most valuable assets you could have for your business.
Awesome. So this has been such an interesting discussion, Cory. It really has. I think that, a lot of Pilates teachers just don't want to think about the business end of things and the legal end of things. And the service that you provide allows people to do their business and not worry about all of this other stuff because it gets taken care of. Now, I do want to say that Cory has an offer for listeners of the Pilates Goddess podcast, and it is a $400 discount on the 3-document package. Yeah. And the 3-document package is really those documents that, we were discussing, right? That is kind of the solid basis of protecting your business. You just need to use code Pilates Goddess. I will, of course, put a link to the 3 agreements page and the code. You can also, where's the best place for people to get in touch with you, Cory, if they want to learn more?
You can go to our website, consciouscounsel.ca. You could also just write me an email, Cory@consciouscounsel.ca, and be like, hey, I listened to your awesome conversation with Lynda. And I'll just add one other thing. In addition to anyone who buys the package, I'm happy to chat with if you have insurance questions or you have a policy or you need some support around that, because really for this conversation, it's the privacy policy, the waiver, the service agreement, plus making sure the insurance is dialed in. So if you don't have insurance, I can point you in the right direction. If you have a question, I can help take care of that for you.
That's great, because I do have, we have listeners from all over the world. But we do have a lot of listeners in Canada. We do have a lot of listeners in the US who are, navigating insurance that say won't cover outside of the country. There's all kinds of interesting questions that people have come to me with. And now I'm just going to send them over to you. Perfect. So you can answer those. So once again, folks, thank you so much for listening to the Pilates Goddess podcast. If you love the podcast and you found some use from it, please go over to Spotify, to the Apple Podcasts app, iTunes, and leave a rating, and if you can, a written review. And definitely get in touch with Cory Sterling at consciouscounsel.ca. And of course, all the links will be in the show notes, so you don't have to worry about writing them down. And thank you so much, Cory, for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. I had such a fun time chatting with you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for making the effort to do all the amazing, share the information that you do with people, to have your own community, to direct them in the right way, and help get everyone one step closer to living the lives that they want to live. So I acknowledge you for that. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. And guys, as always, thank you. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Music brought to you by Nerd Salad. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, especially if you liked it. And please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks.